Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you thought the Roman Coliseum was only dangerous for the gladiators down in the arena, buckle up because you're in for a wild ride. Turns out, the spectators were risking their lives too. And get this, the richer you were, the more likely you were to get caught up in the chaos. Yeah, those fancy front row seats, not as safe as you'd think. Today, we're diving into the stuff they don't tell you in history class about what it was really like to attend the games in ancient Rome. This is part one of a three-part series, so make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss the rest. Let's get into it. Picture this. You're in ancient Rome, heading to the Coliseum for a day at the games. It's the ultimate entertainment, the Super Bowl of the ancient world. Gladiators, wild animals, executions, it's a full-on spectacle. But here's the thing. Going to the games wasn't just about grabbing a seat and enjoying the show. It was a legit gamble with your life. Whether you were a senator sipping wine in the front row or a regular citizen crammed into the cheap seats, danger was everywhere. Let's start with the elite, the VIPs of Rome, and why their prime seats were anything but safe. In ancient Rome, where you sat in the Coliseum wasn't just about getting a good view. It was a status symbol. The closer you were to the arena, the more important you looked. The front row seats, called the podium, were reserved for the heavy hitters, senators, high-ranking officials, and even the famous Vestal Virgins. Sounds awesome, right? You're basically courtside at the biggest show in town, sitting on fancy marble seats and maybe even getting served wine by attendants. These seats were called prima cavia, the first section, the most prestigious spot in the whole Coliseum. You're close enough to see every detail, hear every clash of swords, and yeah, even smell the action. But here's where it gets wild. Those seats put you way too close to the chaos. Roman writers described sitting in the podium as immersive. Kind of a weird word, don't you think? They didn't just mean you felt like you were part of the show. They meant you were practically in it. The podium was maybe 15 feet from the arena floor, where gladiators were swinging razor-sharp weapons and wild animals were tearing through their prey. That's not exactly a safe distance. In fact, the Romans had doctors stationed around the podium during the games, and not just for the fighters. Why? Because when you're that close to total mayhem, things can go wrong, fast. Let's talk about the morning events, the animal hunts, or what the Romans called venationes. These were a huge part of the games, and the Romans went all out, importing deadly animals from every corner of their empire. Lions from Africa, bears from Germany, leopards from Asia, you name it, they brought it to Rome. These creatures were stuffed into underground cages beneath the arena floor, then hoisted up through trapdoors for the show. The Romans built all kinds of safety measures to keep things under control. Trenches around the arena, wooden fences, barriers to separate the animals from the crowd. Sounds like a solid plan, right? In theory, the animals would do their thing, the hunters would take them down, and everyone would cheer from behind their nice, safe barriers. Except, wild animals don't exactly follow Roman engineering plans. Those trenches, not always deep enough. Those fences, not always strong enough. And the guys operating the trapdoors, let's just say mistakes happened. Roman writers loved to describe these shows as thrilling and unpredictable, but they got real vague when it came to the details. Words like surprising and dramatic pop up a lot in their accounts, which, if you ask me, is historian code for things went totally off the rails. When a lion or leopard got spooked, and trust me, being stuck in a dark cage for weeks, then dropped into an arena with 50,000 screaming people would spook anyone, all bets were off. A panicked animal doesn't care about your fancy barriers. A terrified lion isn't gonna politely stay in the arena. Sometimes these animals would bolt, looking for any way out. And guess who was sitting just 15 feet away in their shiny togas? The senators and elites in the podium. If a lion decided it didn't want to fight a gladiator, it might just leap toward the crowd instead. Those safety measures the Romans were so proud of, they worked great, until they didn't. When an animal broke free, the people in the front rows were the easiest targets. But the animal hunts were just the warm-up. Things got even crazier when the gladiators took the stage in the afternoon. Imagine you're a Roman senator, chilling in your marble seat, watching two trained fighters go at it with swords, spears, or even tridents. These guys were professionals, right?
so it should be fine. Except, professional or not, when someone gets slashed with a sword, blood doesn't just stay in the arena. It sprays, it splatters, and guess where it's landing? Right on the folks in the front row. The Romans had all kinds of gladiators with different fighting styles. You had the murmieloso with their big shield and swords, or the retiarius with their nets and tridents. Each style meant different weapons flying around in different ways. Sometimes gladiators would even dedicate their fights to specific VIPs in the podium, getting extra close to the barriers as a sign of respect. Sounds cool? Until you realize that meant they were fighting and bleeding just a few feet from your seat. Every sword swing could send blood or sweat flying your way. And those weapons? They weren't exactly high-tech. Swords could chip or break, net weights could go flying, and tridents with their sharp three-pronged tips could slip right out of a sweaty hand. The Romans were obsessed with showing off their engineering skills. They built drainage systems under the arena to deal with all the blood and had crews ready to rake fresh sand over the mess between fights. But you know what they couldn't engineer away? Physics. When two guys are fighting for their lives with sharp metal weapons, stuff goes flying. Blood, sweat, bits of armor, sometimes even worse. And where does it land? You guessed it, right on the elite spectators who paid top dollar to sit up front. But if you think that's bad, just wait. The gladiator fights were messy, but the midday executions, that's when things got next-level brutal. The Romans didn't just execute criminals. They turned it into a full-on theatrical production. Condemned prisoners were forced to act out gruesome death scenes from mythology, like Orpheus getting torn apart by bears, or Dicalus being burned alive, with costumes and props. And who had to watch this up close? The senators and magistrates in the podium. Attending these executions wasn't optional. For them, it was their civic duty to sit there and prove they could handle Roman justice, even if that justice was happening just 15 feet away. These executions were designed to be as bloody and dramatic as possible. Maximum gore, maximum screaming, maximum spectacle. The Romans wanted everyone to see what happened to those who crossed the empire. But here's the kicker. Sometimes the people being executed weren't random criminals. They could be disgraced nobles or political prisoners, people the elite spectators might have known personally. Imagine sitting in your fancy seat watching someone you used to work with get mauled by a lion, their blood literally splashing onto your toga. Roman writers called these shows educational, saying they taught the ruling class about power and justice. But let's be real. Some senators would fake sudden illnesses or urgent Senate meetings just to get out of there. And we're not done yet. The animals, the gladiators, the executions, those were bad enough. But the real nightmare? The crowd itself. 50,000 passionate Romans packed into the Coliseum, betting huge sums on their favorite fighters, screaming their heads off. When things didn't go their way, that passion could turn deadly in a heartbeat. In Part 2, we'll dive into what happened when the crowd became the danger, and why even the Colosseum's amazing design couldn't save you. Stick around for that, and let me know in the comments what you think about these front-row death traps.
Blood, wild animals, executions. It was chaos. But today, in Part 2, we're diving into what happened when the crowd itself became the real danger. 50,000 screaming Romans could turn a fun day at the games into a complete nightmare. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss Part 3. Let's jump back in. So picture this. You're at the Coliseum, the biggest show in ancient Rome. The arena's buzzing with energy. Gladiators are fighting, animals are roaring, and the crowd is electric. Romans loved their games. They'd bet massive amounts of money on their favorite fighters, cheer like crazy for their top gladiators, and get way too invested in the outcome. Sounds like a modern sports game, right? Except when things went wrong in Rome, it wasn't just booing or throwing popcorn. The crowd could turn deadly, fast. Let's take a real example to set the stage. Back in 59 AD, in the city of Pompeii, a gladiator match was supposed to be a standard day of entertainment. Locals were facing off against fighters from a nearby town, nothing out of the ordinary. But things got heated. Fans started trash-talking, then throwing rocks, and before anyone could stop it, knives came out.
People died in the stands that day, not in the arena, but in the audience. It got so bad that the emperor banned gladiator games in Pompeii for 10 years. Now imagine that same energy, but in the Coliseum, with 50,000 people packed into a massive steep stadium with limited exits. That's a recipe for disaster. The Colosseum was a marvel of engineering, no question. The Romans built it to show off their power, with perfect sight lines, incredible acoustics, and a design that could handle huge crowds. But when those crowds lost control, that perfect design became a problem. The seating was arranged in steep tiers, with the elite in the podium down at the bottom and regular folks up higher. Sounds great, until the crowd starts panicking or rioting. When things went south, the people in those fancy front row seats were in serious trouble. Here's why. The podium had its own VIP entrances, these cool private tunnels that led straight to the arena level. Awesome for showing off your status, terrible for getting out in a hurry. If a riot broke out in the upper tiers, and trust me, it happened, debris would start raining down on the people below. Angry fans would chuck stones, chunks of wood, anything they could get their hands on. And who was right in the line of fire? The senators and big shots in the podium, sitting at the bottom of this giant bowl of chaos. But that wasn't even the worst part. When the crowd panicked, it was like a stampede. Everyone would rush for the exits at once, and the Colosseum's narrow staircases and passageways couldn't handle the crush. People got trampled, bodies piled up in the tunnels, and the elite down in the podium, they were trapped. Those private entrances that made them feel so special, they became bottlenecks during a riot. With thousands of screaming, shoving spectators pushing down from the upper levels, the rich folks had nowhere to go, stuck between the arena wall and a wall of panicking people. And it wasn't just riots that made the crowd dangerous. Sometimes the excitement of the games themselves could turn deadly. Romans were passionate about their gladiators, and when their favorite lost, or worse, when they thought a fight was rigged, things could spiral out of control. Fans would start fights in the stands, throwing punches, weapons, whatever they had. In a packed stadium with limited space, a small scuffle could turn into a full-blown disaster in seconds. And the elite in the podium, they were sitting ducks, with no easy way to escape the chaos raining down from above. Now, let's shift gears and talk about another danger, one that didn't come from the arena or the crowd, but from the Colosseum itself. The Romans were incredible engineers, but even they couldn't plan for every possibility. The upper levels of the Coliseum, where the poorer citizens sat, had their own set of deadly problems. Unlike the fancy marble seats down below, the upper tiers were made of wood. Sounds fine, right? Except wood plus 50,000 people, oil lamps for lighting, and the hot Mediterranean sun was a fire hazard waiting to happen. Imagine you're in the cheap seats, packed in with everyone else, watching the games. It's summer in Rome, so it's sweltering. You're sitting on wooden benches that have been baking in the sun for hours, surrounded by oil lamps flickering away. One stray spark could turn the whole upper section into a fireball. The Romans knew this was a risk. They had fire crews on standby. But when you're dealing with that many people in a confined space, there's only so much you can do. A fire in the upper tiers wasn't just a possibility, it was a disaster waiting to happen. And it wasn't just fire. The sheer weight of thousands of people, plus the massive awning system they used for shade, pushed the Colosseum structure to its limits. Roman engineers were brilliant, but ancient building techniques could only do so much. Over time, the wooden beams in the upper levels would start to crack under the stress. Support posts would shift, and entire sections of seating could collapse without warning. When that happened, the people in the cheap seats were the ones who got crushed first. No reserved spots, no personal space, just a packed crowd with nowhere to run. Then there's the heat. Rome in summer is no joke, and sitting in direct sunlight for 8 hours straight was brutal. Dehydration, heat stroke, and fainting were common in the upper levels. Medical emergencies happened all the time, but getting help wasn't easy when you were stuck in a sea of people with limited access to the exits. The Romans tried to keep things under control with their fancy engineering, but you can't engineer away the sun or the chaos of a massive crowd. Oh, and remember those wild animals from Part 1? The ones that sometimes broke free from the arena? Well, they didn't always head for the exits. A panicked lion or leopard, desperate to escape the noise and chaos of the games, might climb the arena walls, heading up toward the upper tiers. Imagine being in the cheap seats, already dealing with the heat and the cramped conditions, and suddenly a terrified wild animal is charging your way. Yeah, that happened. The social hierarchy that put the rich in danger down below created a whole different set of problems for the poor folks up top. So whether you were a senator in the podium dodging flying debris or a regular citizen in the upper tiers praying the wooden seats wouldn't collapse, the Coliseum was a dangerous place to be. The Romans built the most incredible arena in history, but they also filled it with every possible way to get hurt, or worse. And we're not done yet. In Part 3, we'll wrap things up by looking at the bigger picture. Why did 50,000 people keep showing up to a place that was basically a death trap with entertainment? Plus, we'll explore some of the craziest stories of what went down in the Coliseum. Drop a comment below. Would you risk it for a front row seat?
We've already covered how the elite in the front row podium seats were dodging blood and wild animals, and how the crowd itself could turn into a deadly riot. Today, in Part 3, we're wrapping it up by looking at why 50,000 people kept showing up to this chaotic, dangerous spectacle and some of the wildest stories of what went down in the Coliseum. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that bell, and let's dive in. So, let's get to the big question. Why did so many Romans, rich, poor, senators, citizens, pack into the Coliseum day after day, knowing it could be a total disaster? The answer lies in what the games meant to Roman society. The Colosseum wasn't just a place to watch gladiators and animals. It was the heart of Roman culture, a stage for showing off power, status, and loyalty to the empire. For the elite, sitting in the podium wasn't just about getting a good view. It was about being seen. Your seat screamed your social rank to everyone in the stadium. The closer you were to the action, the more important you looked. Skipping the games? That was like admitting you weren't tough enough to handle Roman life. For the regular folks up in the cheap seats, the games were a rare chance to escape the grind of daily life. Free entry, free food handouts, and a day of epic entertainment, that was a big deal in a world where most people were scraping by. Plus, the games were a way to feel connected to the empire's glory. Cheering for a gladiator or betting on a fight made you part of something huge, even if you were stuck in the sweaty, crowded upper tiers. The Colosseum was like a pressure valve for Rome's tensions. Everyone, from senators to laborers, got caught up in the hype. But let's talk about some of the craziest moments that kept people coming back despite the risks. One thing the Romans loved was spectacle, and they didn't hold back. Beyond the animal hunts and gladiator fights, the midday executions were where things got really unhinged. These weren't just quick punishments, they were full-on theatrical productions. Criminals, prisoners of war, or even disgraced nobles were forced to act out gruesome scenes from mythology. Think Orpheus getting ripped apart by bears or Daedalus burning alive, with costumes and props. The crowd ate it up. But for the elite in the podium, it hit different. These weren't always random strangers. Sometimes they were people the spectators knew, like former allies or political rivals who'd fallen out of favor. Imagine you're a senator, forced to sit 15 feet from the arena while someone you used to have dinner with is torn apart by a lion. Blood splashing, the crowd's roaring, and you're supposed to act like it's just another day at the office. Roman writers said these executions were educational, teaching the ruling class about justice and power. But let's be real. Some senators bailed halfway through, claiming sudden stomach aches or urgent meetings. Watching that kind of carnage up close, with blood literally landing on your toga, wasn't exactly a fun afternoon. Then, there were the times when the games went completely off script. Take the animal shows. The Romans loved showing off their ability to conquer nature, bringing in exotic creatures from all over the empire. But those animals didn't always play along. Roman sources mention surprising moments during the hunts, and while they're light on details, we can piece it together. Trapdoors jamming, fences breaking, animals panicking. Sometimes a leopard or bear would leap toward the crowd instead of fighting the hunters. For the folks in the podium, that meant dodging a 500-pound predator.
For the poor in the upper tiers, it was even worse. A spooked animal might climb the arena walls, heading straight for the packed, chaotic cheap seats with nowhere to run. Gladiator fights could get just as wild. These guys were pros, but accidents happened. A stray sword, a broken net weight, or a trident slipping from a sweaty hand could go flying into the stands. And since gladiators sometimes fought extra close to the podium to honor VIPs, those front row spectators were in the splash zone for blood, sweat, and even bits of armor. The Romans had drainage systems to handle the mess in the arena, but no one planned for what landed on the audience. The elite paid for prestige, but they got a face full of chaos instead. And let's not forget the crowd itself. In Part 2, we talked about how 50,000 passionate Romans could turn violent in a heartbeat. Riots weren't just a one-off thing. If a favorite gladiator lost or a fight seemed rigged, fans would lose it, throwing rocks, starting fights, or worse. In the Coliseum's steep, packed seating, a small scuffle could spiral into a stampede. The elite in the podium were trapped by their fancy private entrances, while the poor in the upper tiers had to deal with collapsing wooden seats or fires from oil lamps. One famous riot in 59 AD in Pompeii got so bad that people died in the stands, and the emperor banned games there for a decade. That same energy happened in the Coliseum too, and it was way harder to escape. Even the building itself was a hazard. The Coliseum was an engineering masterpiece, but it wasn't perfect. The upper tiers, made of wood, were a fire trap waiting to spark. The weight of thousands of people, plus the giant awning system for shade, pushed the structure to its limits. Beams cracked, sections collapsed, and the poor folks in the cheap seats were always the first to get crushed. Add in Rome's brutal summer heat, and you had constant medical emergencies. Heat stroke, dehydration, fainting. Getting help in a packed stadium? Good luck. So, rich or poor, front row or back, the Coliseum was a gamble. The elite faced blood, animals, and crowd violence down in the podium. The poor dealt with fires, collapses, and stampedes up top. Yet 50,000 people showed up day after day for the thrill, the status, and the chance to be part of Rome's epic story. The Colosseum was the ultimate symbol of Roman power, but it came with a catch. Every seat had a front row view to danger. That's it for our series. What do you think? Would you have risked a seat in the Colosseum for the ultimate Roman experience? Drop a comment below and let me know what other crazy history topics you want me to cover. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.